Our next step in the process is to start smoothing out portions of our hard bind. So obviously before we start with the model, we are going to look at a simple cylinder which has been hard bound right now to these joints. If you remember, we had actually done something like this. Here, let me just go ahead and remove unused influences, and that way that tip joint is not affecting uh, our cylinder at all. So I've got hard bind, of course. I've got joint 1, which pretty much controls the bottom half of the cylinder, and joint 2, which controls the top half. And this is a hard bind, which means every vertex will be either completely controlled or completely not controlled. Which means it either has a white or a black on it when you select a joint. Okay, so I need to smooth this out, of course. It's possibly a good idea to have a wireframe on shaded mode on. So here's what I'm going to do. Okay, I'm going to use animation. So let me go ahead and sort of animate this a little bit. So that way I see some animation. Oh, I don't have my auto key on. Let me just set my auto key. Here you go. Okay. So here's how I'm going to be fixing this. Always make sure that you have your default keyframe on the first frame right here, and then all the way back, of course, deform it, translate it, rotate it, whatever it is that you're doing. And now here's where I'm going to start fixing it. Now there are different ways of fixing it. One way is to, of course, make sure that everything else is locked, but in this particular case, we don't have many more joints, but only 2 joints to work with. So I'm going to keep both of them unlocked. You've got your paint mode and your select mode, so I'm going to go into your select mode, go into F9 or vertex mode, if you will. Here you go, I'm selecting all of this right here. Go back into the paint mode. I'm going to go to smooth, and I'm going to start flooding smooth. Now you're wondering what happens if I flood smooth. It basically starts smoothing that particular set of vertices. So it's like smooth, 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 smooth. There you go. That's pretty good. And now you can see that that looks fairly good. That's fantastic. It's pretty good. There's another way to do this, and let me just Control Z all the way back to the hard bind. So another way to do it is to, to select these vertices, go into your paint mode, and instead of the paint mode, go into your select mode, select a joint, and now you see that your value of influence exerted by this joint, which is joint 2, on these sets of vertices is set to 1. Change it to 0.5, and you see what has happened? Now this joint is exerting a value of 0.5 on these right here, which means what happens to the rest of the 0.5 influence, which joint is going to be controlling? The other unlocked joint, which is joint 1. So joint 1 has 0.5 on it. So you can literally select these vertices, if you will, and you see if I select this, this is influence of 1 from joint 2, influence of 0 from joint 2. You can literally slider control it, if you will. So I'm going to say 0.5, which if I go into my paint mode, you'll see is nice and gray, if you will. So that is fantastic. My cylinder is bending exactly where I wanted it to bend. Now say for example you didn't want there to be a sharp bend, you want this to be nice and curvy, which means you're going to have to work on these as well. So once again, you can select those vertices, you can go ahead and do this mathematically, which means you can go into joint 2 and say 0.75. Select these right here, select joint 2, 0.25. You see, that's kind of like the more mathematical way of doing things. If you guys are particularly used to working with numbers, let me Control Z. I can show you another way of doing it is also to go into your paint mode, select your joint 1 or joint 2 and just flood smooth. until you see it looking exactly how you want it to look. Let's go back into the paint mode. You can select either one of these. So remember, everything that you're doing here is basically a give and take of influences between joints. So when you guys are working on any of this, make sure that only two joints are going to be unlocked. So the give and take happens only between those two joints, and that the influence isn't by mistake, by error, being shared with a joint that you don't necessarily want to be involved in this rig right here. Okay, another tool that I wanted to share with you guys is if you just select these vertices right here. I've got my symmetry settings on. I'm just going to switch them off. Is this tool right here, Skin, Smooth Skin Weights. And I've assigned a shortcut to it, which is Alt S. It's not a default shortcut. So anyway, Smooth Skin Weights, what it is going to do is it's going to take control off of you a little bit, and it's going to smooth the weights on the selected vertices for all the joints that are affecting it. You see that when we are working in the paint weights tool, we are exchanging weights only between two joints because all the other joints are locked. In this particular case, smooth skin weights does not consider just those two joints. It's going to basically be smoothing the weights on selected vertices from influences coming in from all the joints. So be very careful when you guys are using smooth skin weights. Use it only in small proportions. Don't select a huge chunk of vertices, which I'm thinking in this particular case might just work fine. You see, the reason why it's working so fine here is because we only have two joints. It may not work as well in an actual bipedal geometry, but that remains to be seen. We'll actually put that in practice as we start working on the model. But these are our basics of smoothing our bind or our weights.